watching this free video tutorial from mographplus.com. If you are interested in learning Corona for 3ds Max fundamentally, please make sure to check out our comprehensive introduction to Corona for 3ds Max, which is a massive 9-hour long course in which we explore all the aspects of Corona for 3ds Max thoroughly. Welcome folks, it's Khezri here from mographplus.com, and in this lesson we'll learn how to create realistic fabric shaders in Corona for 3ds Max. You can download the project files for this lesson down below in the description. Now let's select the fabric geometry and press M to open up the material editor. Create a new Corona material and assign it to the geometry. If you take a look at this reference photo, you can start to see what makes fabrics look like fabrics. Look how the faces or polygons that are parallel to our viewing direction are darker, and the perpendicular faces to our viewing direction become fuzzier and brighter. If you can simulate this, you can get realistic fabric shaders in Corona. In 3ds Max, let me first load this color palette that I have already saved out from the Utilities tab. First, we try to create a purple velvet shader in its simplest form. Then we add more and more details as we go and make it more realistic. Now, to simulate that described attribute of fuzziness and brighter colors at glancing angles, we start with a fall-off map. So let's add one to the work area. And connect it to the diffuse color input of the Corona material. From the preview, you notice we get this black color at the parallel faces to the viewing direction, and it transitions to this white color at the perpendicular faces to the viewing direction. And this is very close to what we want. We just need to adjust this transition a bit and change the colors to what we want. First of all, let's change the black color in the fall-off map to this dark purple, and the white color or the color at the glancing angles to a brighter shade of the same purple. Down here, using the mix curve, I'm just gonna restrict that fuzziness to the very glancing angles. Okay, and this should give us a basic velvet material. Now let's start the render and see what we get. And here is our basic velvet shader. In the frame buffer, let me just increase the overall contrast of the render to 1.8. If we want to get a different velvet color, we can simply change the defined colors in the fall-off map, or simply connect the fall-off map to a 3ds Max color correction node and adjust the hue and saturation in the color correction map to get different colors. So let's actually do that. In this case, let's set the hue shift to something like -110 and saturation to 41. You can obviously try different values for the hue shift to get different velvet colors. Now let's see what we get. And now we get this nice teal velvet material. Now let's skip the color correction and connect the fall off directly to the diffuse color so we can have our purple velvet back. Using only fall off, we can simulate that soft fuzzy feeling to a certain extent. And to get to the next level, we need to add another layer of realism. Let me duplicate our first material and assign the new material to our fabric geometry. To simulate that fuzzy feeling, we can try to add tiny brighter points all over the surface of our fabric material. And to achieve that, first let's make a brighter fall-off map compared to what we have. So connect the fall-off map to a Corona color correct node. and increase the gamma to something like 1.4 in the color correct node. Now we have two fall-off maps, the darker original version and the brighter one. And to combine these two maps, we can add a composite map. In the composite map, add a second layer. Connect the original fall-off map to layer 1 and the brighter color-corrected version to layer 2. Now we can add a cellular map to simulate those small points on the surface. So let's add one. Let's temporarily connect it to the diffuse color and run the render. I'm going to draw a small region to get faster feedbacks. In the cellular map, let's reduce the cell size to 0.02. We want very, very small points. Change the cell color to black, first division color to black, and the second division color to a mid-gray with the value of 150. Now connect the cellular map to layer 2 mask of the composite node. And connect the composite node to the diffuse color of the corona material. Let's quickly rerun the render and see what we get. And here is our nice fuzzy velvet shader. It might be impossible to see the changes through this recording session, but it adds a lot to the overall believability of the shader. To get the same shader but with a different color, again, you can simply color correct the original fall-off map before connecting it to any downstream nodes, or you can actually simply color correct the composite node. So you just color correct the whole thing, but let's try the first method here. So I'm gonna quickly duplicate the whole shader. Add a new 3ds Max color correct node. Connect the original fall-off map as the input. Change the hue to -110 and saturation to 41. Now connect this map to the layer 1 input of the composite and also to the existing corona color correct node that is being connected to layer 2 input of the composite node. And that's it. We can assign this shader and run the render again to see what we get. And this is our nice teal fuzzy velvet shader. If I bring up the reference picture again and zoom in a tad, you notice we have this fabric pattern throughout in this particular reference photo. So let's add this as well. I'm going to duplicate the purple version and assign the new shader. Load this fabric pattern image. And we want to use this as the bump map. So connect it to the bump map input of the corona material and set the bump strength to around 5. It could be less than this, but let's try 5 here. And set the tiling of the fabric pattern image to 0.2 and 0.2 so you can actually see the pattern throughout the geometry. Now let's see what we get. And now we have this beautiful fabric pattern as well. Let's create a crushed velvet, something like this photo right here. For this, let's duplicate the fuzzy velvet shader before we added the bump mapping. We need two base velvet shaders. One should be fairly brighter than the other one. Then we mix the two to get the final crushed velvet look. We already have that first set of nodes that combined together would make the darker velvet shader. Now we just need to create a brighter velvet and combine the two. To do that, simply add another composite node and make sure it has two layers. For the first layer, just connect the existing composite node, which makes the darker velvet. Now connect the existing composite node to a Corona color correct as well. In the Corona color correct node, simply increase the brightness to something like 0.3. And this is our bright velvet or brighter velvet. And now connect this color correct node to layer 2 of our new composite node. To mix these two layers, load this map called BW8 and use it as the layer 2 mask input. I'm going to set the tiling for BW8 map to 0.2 and connect the last composite node to diffuse color of the Corona material and assign it to the geometry. Now let's see what we get. And now we're getting this nice and realistic crushed velvet shader. To control and override the color of this fairly complex velvet shader and get a different color again, let's duplicate the whole shader. Now, before connecting our last composite node to the diffuse color, we can simply insert a 3ds Max color correction node. And connect the color correction node to the diffuse color input. Set the saturation to something like 40. And now if you try different hue shift values, you would get different velvet colors. From green to blue to purple to red to orange and everything in between. In this case, let's try something like -87 for the hue shift. And let's see what we get. Next, let's create a simple upholstery cotton fabric shader. So create a new Corona material and assign it. Load the fabric pattern image again and set its styling to 0.2. We need a new fall-off map to simulate that previously described attribute of fabric, so lay one down and connect it to the diffuse color input. Now adjust the mix curve a bit like the last time. Connect the fabric pattern texture to map 1 and 2 in the fall-off map. Now we need to make the second color a bit brighter by simply mixing in some of the white color in the fall-off map. So let's decrease the map contribution to 65%. And now the white color will mix in by 35% at the glancing angles. Now for the bump map, simply connect the fabric pattern image to the bump input of the Corona material and set the bump strength to around 10 and run the renderer again. And here is our beautiful realistic cotton. Like the velvet shader, you can add a bit more realism using the cellular map technique, but I'll leave that up to you so you can try it in your own time. While we are here, let's create a colored version of this. Simply duplicate the whole shader. This time add a Corona mix node and use the fabric pattern image as the top input, and use this light reddish brown as the second color. Set the mix operation to exclusion and connect the mix map to map 1 and 2 input of the fall off node. For this to look better, let's decrease the mix amount for the second color to around 40%. Now we basically mix in more of that white color at the glancing angles. Let's run the render again and see what we're going to get. And there you have it. Next, let's go for a satin or a silk look. For satin, if we take a look at this reference photo, you notice silk or satin is different compared to other fabrics, and the highlights are kind of playing with you. There is no well-defined pattern that you can describe, but I have a pretty good formula to create highly realistic satin or silk shaders, and it involves curves. So back in 3ds Max, let's create a new Corona material and assign it to the fabric geometry. For silk, first we need our fall off map. So let's load it and connect it to our diffuse color. Using the mix curve section in the fall off map, we can remap these values. There is a particular curve that results in a very, very close look to satin or silk. What we're doing here, basically, we're trying to put the highest and the brightest values to be a bit of the exact parallel angles to our viewing direction, and making kind of the very frontal angles a bit brighter. And a curve like this should give us a kind of silk or satin-like look. Just needs a bit more work to make it better. I've saved out a better curve in my sample slots, and if I instance it in the editor and connect it instead of the one we already have, this should give us a really nice satin shader. The next thing would be to incorporate the specific colors that we are looking for. For the black color in the fall off map, let's use a dark purple, and for the white color, use this kind of brighter shade of the same color. I'm gonna connect the fall off map to the to a Corona color correct, and so we can do some basic color correction here. And in the color correct node, I think the overall silk or satin here looks a bit dark, so let's increase the gamma to something like 1.3. Now let's see what we get. And voila, you have a very realistic satin shader. To get a different satin color, first let's duplicate the whole shader and assign the new shader. Now I'm going to connect the color correct node, the Corona color correct node, to a 3ds Max color correction node, and connect that node to the diffuse color instead. Now by simply changing the hue shift, you can get any satin color that you want. Let's try -105. -90. -65. 65. And 130. And here is our new satin shader. For now, let's stop the render. And for the final shader, let's create a towel shader. I'm gonna create a new Corona material and assign it. and add a fall-off map again. Use this darker shade of blue as color 1 and the brighter shade of the same color as color 2. And adjust the mix curve again like we learned before. For the displacement map, let's load this towel image and set its tiling to around 0.6. And connect it to the displacement input of the Corona material. In the Corona material, set the displacement max level to 0.5 centimeters. And in the render settings, under the Performance tab, decrease the displacement screen size to 1 pixel so we get more detailed displacement mapping. Let's run the render again and see what we get. We have discussed displacement mapping thoroughly in our comprehensive introduction to Corona for 3ds Max course, which is available on our website mographplus.com. So if you have any problem understanding displacement mapping, you can check that course out. And basically here is our towel shader. We can connect the fall-off map to a 3ds Max color correction node. And probably decrease the saturation a tad to something like -25. I think this looks a bit better. And obviously, if we wanted to get a different color, we can change the hue shift as you wish. Let's try something like maybe 41 for the hue. So that's about creating realistic fabric materials in Corona for 3ds Max. Make sure to subscribe and follow MoGraph Plus. See you next time. Thank you for watching this free video tutorial from mographplus.com. If you are interested in learning Corona for 3ds Max fundamentally, please make sure to check out our comprehensive introduction to Corona for 3ds Max, which is a massive 9-hour long course in which we explore all the aspects of Corona for 3ds Max thoroughly.